All right, so welcome everyone. This is our March Facts and Snacks about extreme risk protection orders. My name is Brandy and I work with Violence Free Colorado and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And just a couple tech things as folks are signing in and logging in. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down menu to share that with everyone. If you'd like to put your name, your pronouns, if you feel comfortable sharing, as well as your organization, that would be great. We are going to be using the chat for the duration of the webinar. So if you have questions for the presenters or if you have a tech issue or something, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the webinar. If you would like to have closed captioning, you can go ahead and click on the CC at the bottom of your screen and enable the subtitles. If that's something you would like to do, you can also, you should be able to control the size of those subtitles as well. We will have 2 rounds of polls, short polls, in this webinar today, so just be on the lookout for that. And also know that obviously we are recording this. Again, any questions or things that come up, feel free to put those in the chat. So I would like to introduce, I'm super excited as we're going to be talking about ERPO, as I mentioned, extreme risk protection orders. This presentation is going to be put on by Eileen McCarran, who's been a volunteer in the gun violence prevention movement for 27 years. And she's currently the head of Colorado Ceasefire's Legislative Action Branch, which introduced the entire concept of ERPO in Colorado, as well as Leslie Ervin, who served on the board of Texas Gun Sense for many years before moving to Denver. She recently joined the outreach board of Colorado Ceasefire and is working on increasing public awareness for the extreme risk protection orders law. So that is a mouthful and we're excited that you're here. So Eileen and Leslie, I'm going to throw it to you and it's all you if you'd like to share your screen.
Brandy, were you going to do the poll questions now?
I can do your initial poll question whenever you would like. Would you like that now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's our first poll. Okay. So here's our first poll. Question number 1, do you know how a person can apply for an ERPO? Question number 2, do you know who can apply for an ERPO? So feel free to answer those. If for some reason you can't access the poll, it's okay to type that into the chat. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. About 90% of folks who have voted. Thank you for doing that. A couple more seconds. All right, so 93% of you all voted. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to end this and share the results. Can you see the results?
Yes. Oh, that's good. So, I mean, it's good in that we, hopefully when we leave today, that those would all move to yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing those. Oops. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you all for participating in the poll. And I'm going to turn it over to Eileen and Leslie.
Great. So my screen's not coming up and I'm not sure why. I'm doing share screen and clicking on it, but it's not showing for people, is it? Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Hey.
Had another button to click.
Yes, no worries. And if you want to click on that from the beginning, it'll take us right to the slideshow.
Okay.
Yay.
I'm actually going to, okay. So we're going to talk today about the Extreme Risk Protection Orders law that was passed in 2019. And the origins for this law were in July 20th of 2012 with the Aurora Theater, which, as many of you know, 12 people were killed and there were scores injured, and some of them with lifetime paralysis issues. At the time, the shooter was actually being treated by a counselor, and he had spoken of wanting to harm other people, but his threat was rather general and not specific, so they couldn't use the M1 or 72-hour hold that a counselor could have invoked if he had been more specific. So in the ensuing legislative session in 2013, after the Aurora shooting and then the Sandy Hook shooting that followed in December, there were a number of gun bills that were considered, and 5 of them were enacted. But one that was dealing with gun violence and mental health went to the cutting room floor. It did not make it through committee. And so and then that one was something dealing with M1 holds and gun access after coming out of the hold. So we went back to the drawing board and talked to the people at the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, which is an organization up in Washington, D.C. And they said, we've been rethinking this, and probably the thing to do is do an ERPO, try to get a law, an extreme risk protection orders law that would enable families and law enforcement to disarm or remove access from people who are dangerous. And so we actually, in May of 2016, held a forum on that very issue, hoping to run it the next year, but the legislative makeup was not propitious for it. And so we thought we'd have to wait till 2019. But actually, in New Year's Eve of 2017, the morning of New Year's Eve, the law enforcement was called out to a man who was having apartment where a man was having severe mental distress issues. But what happened is, on their second visit back, he ambushed them. And there were 4 law enforcement officers injured and 1 killed, and that was Zachary Parrish, the third, whose picture is here. It turned out that the shooter's mother and law enforcement actually knew that he was quite troubled, and she had even taken away his firearms, but returned them when he threatened her. So, Leslie.
Hey, everybody. I'm here to kind of give you a mom's perspective, right? When a person in crisis is considering harming themselves or others, family members and law enforcement, but I'll say family members, are probably the first to see the warning signs. And yes, there's hardly anything that you can do about it until it's too late. And that's my story. I moved to Colorado from Texas. I have 4 children, and my eldest son, his name is Lex. He was always a challenging kid. He had a lot of behavioral issues. And as he got older, his issues increased. My husband and I tried everything we could to try and get him help, and, working with schools and counselors over the years, and nothing really worked. So Scott and I, my late husband, had committed to taking care of Lex for his whole life. And early on, when he turned 18, I got a very extremely disturbing phone call from the local gun shop. My son had gone down there on his 18th birthday, right when this shop opened, to try and purchase firearms. And he was actually, so he made them so scared that the gun shop owner thought that he was on PCP. This was his affect. In other words, he was disturbed enough that you could see it, So that day I went down and picked my son up, came home, and the first thing I did was to call the police. I called Austin Police Department, and I said, you need to come over here and talk to me, because my son he's not okay, and he's trying to purchase guns. So they came over and they interviewed my son, and they interviewed me, and they agreed that he was definitely in crisis and he should not have access to firearms. And I was thrilled because I thought, oh, thank goodness, there's help. We can work through this and keep everybody safe. Well, they went on to tell me that in Texas, there is no law that stands that would allow a family member to petition the court to remove firearms from a family member. And I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely horrified. And for the next 2 years, I called APD to come over to my house every single month, sometimes twice a month. And I told them, again, my son is continuing to buy firearms. My son is buying ammunition, right? You need to do something. And they would always say, ma'am, there's nothing we can do. We told you that. And I said, there is something you can do. You can write down that my son is going to harm somebody and that you can do nothing about it. Because guess what? You're going to come back to me and tell me that I should have done something. I'm telling you, I'm trying to do everything I can. Anyway, long story short, 2 years later, he came under the delusion that his dad, my husband, Scott, was an imposter that was going to harm our family. And he killed him. He stabbed him. And luckily, if you can call it luck, my 16-year-old son was there at the time, and he was able to subdue Lex, his brother, as his dad lay bleeding out, so that Lex could not take his guns and go harm more people. Luckily, Lex was arrested, and unfortunately, there was only one death, which was my husband, Scott. He died in 2013 on September 18th. What I did after that, after I got my life together, was I decided that I had to do something and share my story, because I assumed there was some way that law enforcement could help me. I had to spread the word that there was not, and we needed this law. So I worked for the next 6 years with Texas Gun Sense trying to pass this law. It was turned down every session, and as a matter of fact, in Texas, we've gone backwards instead of forwards in terms of sensible gun policy. I moved here a couple of years ago and joined Colorado Ceasefire because guess what? You guys are so lucky. This law is in effect here, and I want to make it my life's work to go out into communities that are disadvantaged, especially to spread the word about this and to tell people that there is a way now that they can keep their communities and their loved ones safe. So that's my story. And yes, I would say law enforcement, I would say family members first are the first ones to notice there was something amiss, and yeah, law enforcement too. But again, yes, in Texas, there sure was nothing we could do about it until it was too late. All right, next slide. So what is an extreme protective order? First of all, it's a civil suit. It's not criminal. It's civil, and this allows a household member or law enforcement to petition the court. This would temporarily remove an individual's firearms and prohibit them from further access for firearms during the duration of the order, if they pose a significant risk to themselves or others. So ERPOs help people in crisis stay safe by removing the guns, because once the firearms are out of the house, then the people can seek treatment, their behaviors can be stabilized, and then they can also access resources that'll help them address the causes of their dangerous behaviors. So there's a lot of different situations that might call for an ERPO. Some of them are, for example, if your loved one, family member is in a personal crisis, if they have any kind of suicidal ideation, history of domestic violence or aggression, if they have demonstrated signs of being dangerous, as my son did, or if they have used threats of violence, or have a history of violence, or if they have unsafe behavior around firearms in general. And so these are all the people that can petition to get an ERPO, and they have to be household members, but household members are viewed as people related by blood, marriage, or adoption. They have a child in common. They've resided with the respondent for at least 6 months. They're domestic partners. They can be step parents, step grandchildren, grandparents, or even grandchildren. The petitioners could also be legal guardians or past or present married or unmarried couples. So there's a whole lot of people that fall under this umbrella. Eileen.
So also, law enforcement is one of the responders too, or people who can petition. And in cases where perhaps you're a practitioner and you're aware of a problem, it's possible that you as a practitioner would not be able to file for an ERPO. You could contact law enforcement and begin the process, and they start collecting the evidence. So that's a possible route too. I failed to tell in some of the history that after this ambush of where Zachary Parrish was killed in late 2017, the last day of 2017, we did try to pass the bill in 2018, and we knew it would fail because of the legislative makeup, or we were pretty sure it would fail, but it did lay the groundwork, and the bill was passed in 2019, and it was actually named the Zachary Parrish III, Deputy Zachary Parrish III Violence Prevention Act. So there are two types of ERPOs. There's a temporary ERPO, and this is kind of like in domestic violence where you need immediate resolution to get people to safety or put people in a safe position. And it's like domestic violence in that the hearing is ex parte. That is the respondent. The respondent is the person who is considered dangerous, and the petitioner is the person who's going to endeavor to get the guns removed. So the hearing will, if you petition for an ERPO through the courts, the hearing will be within 1 court day of filing, and the respondent won't show up, shouldn't show up because they're not informed of it. And the judge will listen to the plea that is made by the petitioner and decide, is this something that rises to the level that the person should be separated from, the respondent should be separated from the guns for a temporary period. And so if the judge feels there's cause, they will order the removal of the firearms and ensure that the buyer cannot, that the respondent cannot buy guns through the background check system. And also the respondent has to surrender the concealed carry permit. There will be, this temporary thing only goes for 14 days, and perhaps that person who's having difficulties, that whatever it is can get resolved within 14 days. They can get the counseling they need and maybe get over the stress that's causing their dangerous behaviors. But there will be a hearing, and the respondent is told that there's going to be a hearing in 14 days to see whether they wish to go to a full year ERPO. Oops, I think I backed up. I need to back up. I somehow hit 2. There we go. A full ERPO, which is actually just called an ERPO. It goes for a year, 364 days. The respondent will be notified of that hearing, and actually the state of Colorado will provide the respondent with legal representation at that hearing, and the state pays for that if it's if the respondent chooses to utilize that. Again, the petitioner is going to tell the story, and this court may issue a full or continuing ERPO. Actually, at this hearing, the level of requirements for the full 364 goes up to being clear and convincing proof that they need to show. And during that period of 364 days, the respondent may appeal, but only one time, to prove to the court that he or she has got their act together and they're no longer a danger to others or themselves. So what are the steps? The steps for obtaining an ERPO is, first, you can request a petition from your county court or district court, and you can download that from the state court's website, the form, and complete and submit the petition, but you have to do it in the district or county court of the respondent. And that's the biggest error that individual household members are making. When they file, they tend to go to their own court. They need to go to the court where the respondent lives. So like if you're living in Denver and the person who's a problem for you is in Arapahoe, you need to file it in Arapahoe. There is no fee, and there are people that they call Sherlocks that are at the court system that can help you, not to provide legal advice, but at least to guide you to the forms you need and maybe things that you need to do to fill it out. If you file, as I mentioned before, if you file for temporary, they will hold the hearing within 1 court day. You as the petitioner must be there in person for the hearing. There are special circumstances, but they're pretty limited where it can be done by phone. And again, as we mentioned before, if the court issues the ERPO, the respondent will have to surrender their firearms, be banned from buying guns, and they'll be provided information on behavioral health resources. So what happens when an ERPO is terminated or expires? The firearms are returned to the respondent within 3 days. If he or she requests, they need to get them back. And if they're eligible to, if they are eligible to possess the firearms. And the National Instant Check system, the background check system, will be updated to return their ability to buy firearms, and they can reapply for a concealed carry permit.
So Colorado was not the first state to adopt the ERPO laws. The first ERPO law was passed in Connecticut in 1999, right after Sandy Hook. So Indiana enacted its law in 2004, and since then we've had 17 other states. So as of 2021, it was a total of 19 states that enacted ERPOs. And one of the criticisms or critiques of ERPOs is that, well, everybody's going to be filing ERPOs against their neighbor because they don't like their neighbor, right? Or, well, first of all, we know that we can only file an ERPO if you're a family member or law enforcement, and there has to be a preponderance of evidence that the person poses a significant risk of injury to themselves or to others. And this means clear and convincing. There's no room for error on this to get a full year ERPO. Also, the petitioner must submit an affidavit signed under oath and penalty of perjury. And I believe there was one case, right, Eileen, where there was somebody in Colorado who actually was charged with perjury because they filed a false ERPO. So we just want to be sure and say that there is a lot of checks and balances to make sure that this isn't just filed willy-nilly on, an angry neighbor or something like that. All right, next.
So there's some myths, and especially they were present during the debate on this law, and they got out into the general populace in ways. So we want to address them. The first is that it's unconstitutional. It's an infringement on one's right to bear arms.
False. It's been challenged in 2 states and held to be constitutional. And Eileen knows a lot more about the Heller case than me. But the Second Amendment is not absolute, as proved by that case, right, Eileen?
Yeah, in Justice Scalia in the 2008, I believe it was, Heller case, statement in there, the Second Amendment is not absolute. So there are cases where it's it doesn't hold, and this ERPO is coming under that view. So the other is it doesn't provide due process for the respondent, and because of there was quite a bit of concern about the guns being removed in an ex parte hearing where the respondent doesn't have a say.
And the facts are that the law includes due process protections, and it's safer for law enforcement and for people that might have suicidal ideations not to tip off the person in advance. And it follows the same ex parte procedure used in domestic violence orders, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with.
And the statements made in the debate is it would be greatly abused by police, ex-girlfriends, hateful neighbors.
Nope, evidence-based petition process and limited petitioners are allowed to file.
This was stated a lot in the debate that, well, we have an M1 hold. It's an M1 hold that we need to utilize here, and we need to change the language on the M1 hold or things like that.
Well, the M1 holds are usually less than 72-hour holds, and there's a limited amount of beds. And people aren't cured in 72 hours. They usually come home in, potentially the same state and return home to their firearms.
So the other is that the law enforcement will be blowing down the doors to confiscate firearms.
Nope, it's a search warrant, and police officers are trained on how to carry this out safely.
And that it puts that it puts the law enforcement officers at risk when they go to seize these firearms.
There's no doubt that if law enforcement is going to go up to somebody's house and attempt to remove firearms, yes, they're going to be in danger. However, it's risk versus what might happen, and we believe they're at greater risk if nothing is done.
And I will comment that in testimony, the sheriff from Douglas County goes, we do this stuff all the time. We have a whole process we go about with this, that we try to plan it out so we approach the respondent in a time that's less problematic. So people, and this is always said with suicide, that people will find another way. They'll just, if without guns, they'll find another way to do suicide.
Well, yes. However, studies have shown that 85% of attempts of gun death end in death versus 5% in non-firearm attempts. And studies have shown that most people who have recovered from an attempt do not go on to attempt a second time. So there's no going back usually from a gunshot.
And claim, well, it won't stop all mass shootings and suicides.
Obviously not, but it's another added tool that we feel is vital for the safety of communities and people. All right, so here's some background on the ERPO filing since the past year and a half or 2 years. In 2020, we had 111 ERPO petitions filed in 24 counties, and Denver was the highest county. The majority of these were filed by law enforcement, who were way more successful than family members. Citizens made more mistakes. They often, for example, filed in the wrong county. And these were filed for prevention of suicides, mass shooting, and domestic violence. And then we have data for 2021 also. There was 144 petitions filed in 40 counties, again with Denver the highest. And this is one of the reasons that we really want to do our ERPO outreach, because citizens, regular people, family members, especially, I'll speak for myself as a family member that was in crisis, we're not thinking with our whole rational mind at that point. I can tell you that when I was living with my son, I was living in fear a lot of the time. So if I were to go down to the courthouse and file a petition, it's likely that if there wasn't somebody to help me, that I might file it wrong. But Eileen knows about this. We have Sherlocks in Denver, and these are people that are assigned to help you file petitions, right? And there are Sherlocks available for people to help file the ERPOs in Colorado.
Yeah, and they should be at most every court. I think it's in almost every court. We were told there are Sherlocks. I will note for people, if there are any people here at El Paso, it's strange, the temporary ERPOs, El Paso was turning down 72% of them, which I find curious, and we're trying to look into that. And someone found in our organization found that, and something relevant to you all, that also domestic violence protection orders were being turned down at a high rate in El Paso County. So there's something interesting there, and you guys may know more about it than we do. So what are some success stories across the country and even in Colorado? In Connecticut, a man whose wife had recently passed and the EMTs heard what he was saying and worked to get an ERPO filed on him. And he later said to them, "You saved my life."
In Washington State, when people were in court, they actually thanked the court for intervening, saying that they were in a dark place. So they were very grateful for this law.
So here in Colorado, I thought it was interesting, the Larimer County Sheriff's Office filed for an ERPO. One of the reasons that adds to this is the Larimer County Sheriff was opposed to the ERPO law, but he filed for one because they overheard an inmate who was planning to do a mass shooting when he emerged from prison.
And another Colorado case, an Arapaho woman's husband had suicidal ideation, and he also agreed to an ERPO.
And in Maryland, a teenager posted a picture of himself with an AR-15 and was heralding himself as an eventual soon-to-be school shooter, and law enforcement intervened, and he was separated from his firearms in an ERPO. Some academic, there are a number of academic studies that have been done on it since the ERPO was enacted, and most of them, or I should say some of them, go back to the Connecticut law because it was in 1999, so they've had many years on it. Swanson, this Duke study, that they found that actually, and we don't have this ability to collect these data in Colorado, but they removed 7 guns for every order. But and 1 in 3 of the subjects were given mental health care and drug counseling. But very importantly is that for every 10 to 20 orders, at least 1 suicide was prevented. And the other thing which is important for us is that in Connecticut, the law enacted in 1999 was not used much because people didn't know about it. But after the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, the publicity started going out in Connecticut, and the number of gun removals increased 5-fold. So what can you do to help? You can visit our website to review and share information. We have the brochure there, and I think Brandy also has the brochure that we have. And we have some more information there. You can spread the word, talk to your friends and colleagues about ERPO. You are actually many of you are on the front line that may have situations where you might want to share the information about it with clients and people who are frightened, but they maybe haven't gone to the level of doing full domestic violence protection orders. Or even then, they might use an ERPO in addition to whatever the court's doing, because maybe the court didn't do it. And so get it in there. And host an informational meeting. We'd love to come out to your community and talk with people in your area, because we believe this is a very powerful tool for preventing gun violence. But it is only a powerful tool if it is used and people know about it. So largely if you can help us identify communities that can benefit from the information, and you can let us know by sending, going to our website and sending us a message or calling us. I guess it's hard to ask questions, so if there was anything on the chat, Brandy, or anything else to say?
Well, we had one question about whether or not the slides will be shared out, if that's something you're willing to be able to do.
Yeah, we can make up a PDF of all those slides and send it to you, Brandy, that you could then share with everyone.
Absolutely.
That would be great. Yeah, so
and I will send out the brochure as well with that. So we also send a link to the recording once we're all wrapped up today. I don't see other specific questions in the chat. So a couple options. You can either type in the chat, or if you want to, in the chat, let me know if you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question. That is another option. So I just want to make that available for everyone in the audience to see if you have questions or you're curious how things work, because it can be, you know, important to understand all the nuances, and we have a couple experts here that can help. So any questions? Right, looks like we have a question. Are there any statistics that show how respondents having a counsel can impact petitions?
No, there are no statistics that I know of. And I have to say the respondent having counsel is a wrinkle that only Colorado has. I don't think any other state has put that in, and it was put in largely to overcome objections by those who were opposed to the bill when it was being passed. And also, it also was like, okay, we're doing something. And I mean, I will have to say, taking away someone's firearms is a huge step to do. And so it was trying to say that, hey, here, the state's going to be here and help you if you have a situation. So I don't know, but I will note that a number of the temporary petitions, I was looking at the data just yesterday, that a number of the temporary petitions did not go on to full. And I actually to the full 364. And I wonder if that's partly that having the respondent having counsel might have been, and that would be good actually to talk to some people about that. So that's a good question. I'm going to write that down to talk to some people in Denver who would know more about how that's working out with the respondent having counsel. There is a lawyer, and we need to put this on our website. I haven't, that there's a lawyer named Ervin Brannigan who has put himself out there to help people who are petitioners on a free basis. And I think the word isn't out there about that, because the Sherlocks cannot provide you legal advice. They can point you to the forms and tell you stuff that you might need there on the forms, but that it's not legal advice.
Looks like we have another, well, we have a question, but the follow-up to what you just answered was, okay, and thank you. I couldn't help but think about pro se petitioners going against an attorney. So thanks for sharing about that attorney. And the other question in the chat is, are there specific times that you need to go into court to file? And I'm going to add on to that, is it different in every jurisdiction?
I think it's just as long as the court's open for you to go in and do your filing, that you should be able to do it any day they're open. You know, there is a county that has like 741 people in it. So I don't know how they handle court cases there. I mean, but here in Denver, it's just a large city, large courts. Actually, in Denver, it's done through the probate court. So if you go to the big courthouse building there on Bannock Street, the new building, I think it's new, but and you go up there, they will point you to the fact that you need to go to the probate court, which is in the Denver City County building, but that's no problem. They'll send you over there to it, but all the other ones are in the district and county courts. And actually, I think the probate court is part of that system. It's just in a separate building. But I think it is that one day, within one court day, there will be a hearing. That's part of the law, so they have to do it, and it's free to you. There's no court cost to you.
Right.
And we will give a copy of our PowerPoint. I was going to do it as a PDF. I hope that's okay.
That will be absolutely okay, and that's how we share most of our handouts from.
Yeah, I don't want people to edit it and then say, look, they said that, and it wasn't really what we said. Anyways.
And thank you to Diana, who posted the link to the ERPO statute. So that's out there for sharing. We'll put that in the follow-up email as well.
It's a long bill. It's about 30 pages. It's a lot of court procedures, and I start to have my eyes glass over on it when I read it, but it's there definitely to see. I see a question about how long do ERPOs last. Well, there's the 14-day temporary ERPO. If it's extended, it will be extended for a full year, where the respondent can appeal during that year one time. Then at the end of the year, before the year's end, it will the court will notify the respondent and the petitioner that the ERPO is ending, and they can ask for an extension, and it could be extended every year. There is no permanent extension, but you could go to court once a year to see that firearms shouldn't be in this person's possession. There is a question there about how quickly will law enforcement acquire the firearms, and I have to go look that one up on a temporary ERPO. I think they try to do it because it's a dangerous situation, they try to do it as expeditiously as they can. In Colorado, and this is something too that is not in other states that I know of, if the law enforcement requests the ERPO, the search warrant is granted at the same time, but it's only if law enforcement does it. So as soon as they are granted the ERPO, the court will grant the search warrant and they can go out for one trip. They can't do that if it's a household member that applies. And I will look up what the law says about how soon they have to pick it up, and I will send that to you, Brandy. That was a very good question. I feel kind of ignorant at the moment that I don't have it right at the tip of my tongue.
Yes, that is a great question, and I appreciate your follow-up on that, because again, there's so many nuances to all of these pieces and steps. So other questions that you all have for Eileen or Leslie? And go ahead.
I will comment. You know, in 2013, we passed a domestic violence relinquishment bill so that when the protection order or a misdemeanor conviction on domestic violence was done, that automatically guns were to be relinquished. But you all know better than I do that that wasn't working like it was set up. It is that, excuse me, I was looking at the chat at the same time. I can't do process two things at one time, my brain. So they did make changes in 2021 to this law to tighten it, and we're still anxious to see if that really, how well that is working. And if it's not working as well as one wanted, this ERPO is a backup that people could take care of that's done. And he's read that officers are only allowed to take guns that are in view and not allowed to search. My understanding is they can go into gun cabinets, and they will. And even if they're locked, they have ways to get into them. And they also, it would be important for the app, and it is, I think, even listed in the law that the petitioner should tell where the guns are located to help them. It is true that, and this has been stated, and I've discussed this, it was stated in court, and I have discussed it with a lieutenant from the Denver Police Department. They will not arrest people for other crimes if they see them, if they have like cocaine out or something like that. They're not, when they go in to seize the guns, their search warrant is to get the guns. And I don't think they're limited to what's just in plain sight. If they know that there are guns in a gun cabinet, or they know where people tend to store them, they will be seized, but they won't arrest for other crimes that are happening unless there's something that's very dangerous for public safety. Like if they go into the home and they're making bombs, they will take action on stuff, but their intent is their search warrant is to seize the weapons, and they will only, the understanding I have is they will only address other issues if it's something that's very, very dangerous to public safety, the whole public safety. You know, if people are wanting to use crack or stuff like that, that's a whatever. I'm just throwing that one out because it's easy to think of drugs sitting there that they may see.
And while we're waiting to see if folks have other questions, I'm going to go ahead and put up our kind of our ending poll, but just know we have extra time if you all have questions for Eileen and Leslie. I'm going to go ahead and launch this other poll. So this is our general poll that we put at the end of our webinars here at Violence Free Colorado. So there's just 3 questions there. And definitely appreciate you all voting. Give us some feedback. And I know not all of our webinars are all the same, and so we have good variety. So some of these might not feel as applicable, and at the same time still good feedback for us. So we really appreciate that. And after you're voted, feel free to think of any other questions for Eileen and Leslie. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. Thank you all for taking that. And going to go ahead quickly, do a quick share. And if anyone ever has questions about our polls, we are always open to that if you ever want information or want data or anything. Not seeing any other questions. So we will follow up with a recording with the brochure, as well as the website links and the slides in PDF form, as well as any info that Eileen comes up with about that question. We might need to follow up with that later, just for you all to know. But I definitely appreciate you being here. Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Leslie, for sharing your knowledge and your own personal stories and everything. That's very helpful. And I hope that all the advocates and folks in the audience know that, you know, if they have questions, they know that there's folks in the field that can help answer those questions. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for all you're doing too.